We have entered the month of December, which means everyone is releasing their ends of the year list and their personal favorite albums of 2024. And I figured might as well just get this out of the way because they're always fun to do and talk about my top 25 favorite albums of 2024. I'll keep the tradition going whenever I do ends of the year list, rank them number 25 to number 1. Number 1 obviously being my personal favorite album of the year. And yeah, other than that, the only other thing to talk about before we get into the top 25 list is that I have 6 honorable mentions that I just want to briefly discuss. First honorable mention is going to be Hauntologist with their debut full-length album, Hollow. This includes the member to that of Mgła, Darkside, the drummer. This is one of his many side projects, and I've always admired Darkside's drum performance on really everything he's done. With his work with Mgła, his work in Kriegsmaschine, which I really think has this standout material, and here with Hauntologist, yes, we get that excellent drum performance, but really the selling point about this album that makes it unique is we have the Mgła sound that you're used to hearing way more rooted in styles of post-rock and post-metal. So think of the sounds of Mgła meets the sounds of like Life Lover or White Ward. Orville Peck, Stampede. Been a fan of Orville Peck since day one and enjoyed basically everything he's done. But what makes Stampede just fall just short of being in my top 25 list, and it's only an honorable mention, is while, yeah, it's obviously an Orville Peck album, when you look at the track listing, every single song has a guest appearance by somebody else. Such noticeable names would be Willie Nelson, Elton John, Peck is all featured on this with an ensemble of other musicians that it doesn't really feel like an Orville Peck album as it feels like a collaborative art piece. And it kind of just gets a bit inconsistent for my personal taste. Some songs I really enjoy, some not really a fan of. But good to see that Orville Peck is gaining more momentum and he has the ability and resources to make an album like this. And it's still enjoyable for what it is, and I would say even though I vastly prefer Pony and Bronco to this, it's definitely a worthy follow-up considering the pace that Orville Peck has been going through with his musical creativity over the past handful of years. Yemen Civil Servant, Silicone Lifeline. This is an industrial techno project that I would say if you're a fan of either Muslim Gauze or Vatican Shadow, this may appeal to you, as it's pretty rhythmic and repetitive for the most part, but the subtle transitions between either dark ambience or noise gives it a bit of variety and kind of makes you pay attention a bit easier with everything going on. And just overall, really solid and enjoyable stuff. African Imperial Wizard with their latest full-length album that I have no idea how to pronounce. So these guys are supposedly a tribal group from the country of Angola. Again, it's all in secrecy, and there are a lot of people that have their doubts if it's legitimate or not. Regardless, I've always found this project really interesting on how it blends like African tribal music with forms of dark wave and experimental electronics. That their first album I think is awesome and worth checking out. This latest full length right here, for what it is, it's more of just like soundscapes and more usage of ambience in terms of just like minimalistic texture changes is what we're getting here in terms of like the dark wave and electronic proportions on the album. There are slight variations of that tribal types of influence coming forth on here when it comes to either the chants or the percussions being used that for what it is, again, it's very interesting, but just falls short of being in my top 25. Morgue Breath, Plagas and Rostro. This is a grindcore band based out of California. It's short and sweet and right to the point. Obnoxious, fast, chaotic grindcore with some elements of hardcore punk thrown in for good measure when it comes to more of like the groove sections on this album. Not much else to say about it other than it's just a really fun listen if you're a fan of grindcore. And the final honorable mention will go to A Look to Dolo, Lux. This is a French occult rock band that experiments with forms of post-black metal, if you want to get that nerdy and technical with the genre tags, and other forms of krautrock every so often. It's solely just an instrumental band, no vocals utilized, that it really makes the instrumentals, the atmosphere, the tone, the reverb, and everything else you would hear instrumentally really do the talking here. that if you're looking for more of an oddball in terms of like occult rock listenings, definitely give this band a shot. Alright, with that all out of the way, we can finally start my top 25 favorite albums of 2024. Starting it off at number 25 is going to be Primitive Warfare, Extinction Protocol. The band name says it all for what you're going to hear on this album, as this is a war metal band based out of the United States that follows the blueprints of war metal to a T. The dynamics are nothing groundbreaking, as it takes all extreme, fast-paced forms of extreme metal that you can think of, such as black metal, death metal, thrash, grindcore, mixed in a blender, and shot up with steroids is basically what this is. And it's just face-melting, ultra fast-paced, super barbaric, no-holds-barred aggression from start to finish. I mean, at points they'll maybe slow it down a little bit to have some groove sections mid-pace, but it goes right back to the ultra fast-paced type of stuff. That's more of like just a roller coaster ride that just goes off the rails the moment a track starts, basically. It's just really fun. I had a blast with it. And if you're a fan of obviously Revenge, Diocletian, Conqueror, Titan Blood, Archgoat, or any other band you can think of that blends all forms of extreme music together, you're gonna love this. Number 24, Brodequin, Harbinger of Woe. The latest full-length album by Brodequin in 20 years, as their last one was back in 2004, and it's like they haven't even lost an edge. They just got right back on the horse creating Brutal Death with the name of Brodequin, and it's just as good as anything else that they've done. It's brutal death metal that's just written and performed so ignorantly, and I mean that in the best way possible, because their songwriting approach, man, it's just so simplistic. There's nothing melodic or musically technical about it, and it's just a wall of like noise in terms of how the riffs sound, but God, it's so obnoxious and hard to ignore that you're just going to fall in love with the chaos and brutality that Brodequin offers on this full-length album. I would say if you're a fan of the latest Defeated Sanity, that being Chronicles of Lunacy, which that I should have also included as an honorable mention, come to think of it now. But if you enjoy Defeated Sanity, but you just don't want like the professionalism that Defeated Sanity has, but you still want that barbarity in the most simplistic form, you have to listen to the latest Brodequin. Number 23, Mamalik, Vita Blue. This is an experimental rock band, at least now they are, but they started out as an experimental black metal band, and that's how I got into them. Which a lot of their early albums are really out there, ambitious forms of black metal, blending forms of black metal, shoegaze, and industrial together, that if you're really looking for boundary pushing stuff, I would say Mamalik's early material is definitely worth checking out. But year by year and album by album, they seem to decrease the black metal influence and favor now more of like ideas of noise rock or jazz rock influences, and especially with the past 3 albums that they've done, way more centered on this noise rock, jazz rock type of a hybrid sound, that I would say of the 3 albums that they've done with this approach, Vita Blue is easily the most jazz-fueled to date. But again, there's still other forms of dark ambience and electronic usage on here that'll throw quite a bit of curveballs your way. That, again, if you're looking for more ambitious and out there forms of noise rock and jazz influence together, Mamalik is definitely doing some really creative stuff that shouldn't be ignored. Number 22, Chelsea Wolfe, She Who Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She. The 7th full-length album by Chelsea Wolfe, and I would state, just like many others who have, a massive improvement from her previous album, Birth of Violence. Well, Birth of Violence kind of felt like this odd, melodramatic, dark singer-songwriter take of like radio-friendly music. This album, Chelsea Wolfe, goes back to her roots, and God, she sticks the landing so hard on this album. As yes, it has that dark, gloomy, dissonant sound that she's just made signature throughout her musical career. But there's a lot of forms of electronica on this album, especially forms of trip-hop, which a lot of people have kind of noticed with it. It's heavily inspired, or at least sounds like, a really early Portishead album, which is a huge bonus on top of it.
along with all other forms, obviously, of goth rock influence that she's always played around with, that I feel like it's because of this dark, gloomy, brooding tone and atmosphere that she's always been known for, and she showcases it again on this album, that she's a musician that's not playing metal, even though it kind of gets a bit doomy with her guitar playing, that would appeal to metal fans. Hence why I feel like for anyone who's really been keeping up with this channel for like dark, atmospheric, or brooding music, Chelsea Wolfe is definitely right up your alley. Number 21, Extra Life, The Sacred Vowel. These guys are an experimental band, I'll just leave it at that, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And I know about this project because the vocalist is Charlie Looker, which I had the pleasure of being on his podcast, God, already over a year ago. Man, time really flies. And I would find out about it whenever he would post an album on his newsfeed on YouTube and listen to it in full. And I would always be mesmerized not only by just Charlie's vocal approach that's really different and unique to say the least, but instrumentally, I don't really know what this is. It's like a weird form of experimental rock that takes influence apparently from like Renaissance music, like medieval types of music, that in some way, I guess one way you can describe it, it's like, what if people from the Renaissance were to play music with today's instruments? It's like one way I guess I could describe Extra Life. And it's just so wild and ambitious, but abstract at the same time. The usage of guitar, violin, percussions, bass, it's all played in just a very experimental way that all kind of like melds together in a weird sense. That, I don't know, it's like a Renaissance post-punk band or something. It's really, really odd, but so intriguing at the same time, that if you're looking for something, you know, really out there in the experimental region, really everything that Extra Life has done to date would definitely appeal to you. Number 20, Noel As Spoken. This is an experimental grindcore band based out of Memphis, Tennessee, that I had the pleasure of seeing perform live earlier this year, where they opened up for Thantafacthath. Great performance. Now, I've always brushed Noel off to the side, mainly because at face value with their description and just how they kind of come off performing live from the live footage that I've seen, it resembles Full of Hell so strongly that I always thought they're just a Full of Hell worship band that really doesn't provide anything new. However, my opinion changed on them quite greatly when this album was released. And just at face value, I couldn't help but feel like this album looks like a Portal album. And Lord and behold, when you listen to it, the opening moments of it, you'll notice that Portal influence immediately, as it has that murky, dissonant, cavernous production value that you would get with a Portal album, but it's just layered over the chaotic noise and adrenaline rush that you would get from a grindcore album. And God, it is just so intense from start to finish. The vocals on here are so vicious and just cut through all the chaos with all the different like screeches and screams and grunts and yells that the vocalist does. It is an adrenaline rush, to say the least. Number 19, Cunt Roaches, with their self-titled full-length album. Cunt Roaches are a German noise punk band that I genuinely feel like they make music to tailor to that for individuals who want their eardrums to explode. Because nothing about this is musically correct. It's very, very obnoxious in every sense. From the guitar riffs that are structured in the sense of like more resembling that of grindcore, just not played as fast, to the percussions that are just so overblown that just really all they do, you'll understand maybe like the bass drum that just adds another layer of noise, to the vocals that are indistinguishable. You can't make out a single word that they're saying. That again, I just feel like that was just utilized to create an additional layer of noise on top of it. That it's an album that has that very gritty DIY approach that you would get with someone who plays around with the styles of punk music, but it's tailored to that for individuals who are looking for a very, I don't know, like pulverizing rhythmic noise album is what this kind of sounds like to me. That, yeah, if you just want to blow out your eardrums, if you're a fan of noise music, you'll have a blast with it. Number 18, Oranssi Pazuzu, with their 6th full-length album. I cannot pronounce that, and I don't want to butcher the Finnish language. It's honestly really incredible that Oranssi Pazuzu is on their 6th full-length album, and yet they still managed to be this consistent releasing this quality of music, because, man, Oranssi Pazuzu, it's hard to explain. They experiment within the realms of psychedelic black metal, but that's really selling them short in terms of like what they actually are, because they have forms of electronica, industrial, dark ambience, noise, psychedelic rock, and they're heavily influenced in terms of their structure, which a lot of people tend to ignore, as they take great influence from like the early 70s krautrock scene, and they're trying to bring that onto psychedelic black metal, is one way of putting it, I guess, which is a mouthful to explain. But with this latest album right here, I've noticed a lot of people tend to describe that it's a lot more frightening and disturbing, as it's more of like this bad acid trip, or going through a labyrinth trying to understand the very unforgiving cold and the nothingness of the cosmos, is what this album tries to convey, at least what I get with it anyway. And God, it is a trip of all trips of nightmares and nothingness, I guess. Just, overall, Oranssi Pazuzu is still releasing some really creative, ambitious music for black metal that album by album, they're just carving out their own signature approach. And with this album, they really showcase that they're in their own dimension. Number 17, Ka, the Thief Next to Jesus. This is the one rap album I included in this list, mainly because I've always been so fascinated by Ka's approach, as I discovered him really late in the game back in 2016 with his full-length album, Honor That Killed the Samurai. And unlike everything I was listening to at the time anyway, in terms of rap music, I was more focused on albums that were, experimental, abrasive, noise-affiliated, or explosive, or high energy, that they weren't metal albums, but they radiated the energy as such of metal. Where Ka was vastly different, as it was a lot more subtle. His pronunciation and flow isn't as high energy or explosive. And I felt like I really had to pay attention to Ka to really absorb everything that he would have to say on any album of his. It was a lot more poetic. Now, fast forward to 2024, present day, and sadly, this will be what a lot of people consider, because of what happened, the final album that Ka will ever release, as I believe back in October, he sadly passed away. And he's always been a very, private individual, so I highly doubt we'll get the details, not like we need to, but sad regardless. And with this final Ka album, what we have is a very sublime and emotive take of Ka's relationship with his faith with Christianity, and more of a relationship between like Black America and their relationship with Christianity, with all the injustice that's happened throughout the United States history from when it started to even present day. There's a lot of injustice, and it's Ka really trying to have a better understanding and kind of challenge his own faith in some sense, or like really start to question his own faith within Christianity. And again, very poetic. It has a bit of experimentation when it comes to the beats and overall flow with the album, with other forms of gospel sprinkled throughout it. That again, it's a very sublime and emotive album that, for really individuals who are looking for that emotionally driven release of 2024, this is up there. Number 16, Position Parallel, with their 5th full-length album. An album I don't want to pronounce because I don't want to butcher the French language now. But Position Parallel is a side project to that of Jufra, the same guy behind Dear Near Volonté, a project I have been obsessing over for years now at this point. And in some sense, it's similar to Dear Near Volonté, only it really heavily borrows the synth pop elements that Dear Near Volonté does. And that's really it. It's a bit more minimalistic, with other forms of new wave influence kind of creeping in throughout the album. But for the most part, it's way more minimalistic and straightforward. I would state, if you are a fan of Kraftwerk, as most people kind of are when you talk about synth pop or anything that has to do with a synthesizer to begin with,
you'll find a lot of enjoyment on this album. So a lot of songs are kind of structured the same way. You'll have slight deviations and transitions of like noises and electronic sounds coming in and out, but for the most part, percussions, beats, rhythms, very straightforward, and just overall a really fun listen. Number 15, Flying Mausoleum, Sunken Seaport to Atlantis. Found out about this album from a friend on Instagram, and funny enough, his band is going to be included in this list way later on in the video. But Flying Mausoleum, it's like, I don't even know what to call this. I know you can just simply label it as experimental rock, but that doesn't give it justice, because overall this sounds like an album that was ripped from the 1970s for today's audience, is kind of what I get from it. As the opening tracks, it sounds like something again from the 1970s, like the prog rock era, in terms of how they're playing the guitar, how they're singing. It resembles that so strongly. But as you progress on into the album, it starts to get a bit faster and more upbeat, almost sounding more in the realms of like punk rock from the 80s. And go a little bit later on into the album, it starts to get a bit abrasive and noisy, as if now it's a form of like noise rock or no wave, something you would get from the 90s. And even towards the end of the album, it starts to get a bit heavier and slower, that it resembles like stoner rock from like, I don't know, the late 60s. Like it just feels like I'm taking a trip of all different eras and decades of all different forms of rock music on one album. And it is just such a ride of a listen. Number 14, Einstürzende Neubauten, Alien Pop Music. Hopefully one day I'll pronounce this project's name correctly, but until then I'll try my best. But humongous pioneers to that with everything and anything that has to do with industrial music. And it's incredible that after 4 decades, I believe now at this point, they're still releasing music just as creative and ambitious as when they started out. Now, with this album, it's pretty straightforward in terms of the structure of every song, as there's 15 of them, I believe, and all of them kind of start out with the vocalist just kind of like introducing, you know, the verses, the percussions, and the beats and the sounds. But as each song progresses on, it builds up into these wild, noisy, like experimental industrial sounds that one would come to expect with this project. And it just kind of like lets loose from there, from the climax to like the falling action and outro of the song, that if you like one song, you'll just basically enjoy the rest of the album. Number 13, Trista Fenniwad with their self-titled full-length album. Another project that I hopefully said somewhat correctly, but these girls are an avant-garde, neoclassical dark wave project. I know, a mouthful to say, that honestly it sounds like something that belonged on the 4AD roster from decades ago. So think of Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance, This Mortal Coil. It strongly resembles that, and the influence is right up there in front. However, I will state what makes this a bit different is their direction's a lot darker, but it doesn't sacrifice that ethereal sound that all the projects that I just named had. And overall, I'm really looking forward to what these girls will bring up next if they continue on with this approach. Number 12, Hell Butcher with their self-titled full-length album. This is basically the closest thing we will get to a new Niflheim record, and I can honestly settle with that, as it has the vocalist of Niflheim. It's just the rest of the lineup is all different musicians from around the Swedish extreme metal scene. And it's just an absolute face ripper from start to finish, as it's a mixture of black metal, speed, and thrash metal, again, that strongly resembles the sounds of Niflheim, just being played under a different name. And it's just top quality stuff, and everything I would want from something that resembles the Niflheim sound. Number 11, Enden, Fall of Spring. This totally caught me off guard, because I thought Enden disbanded, but Lord and behold, they're back with the follow-up after 6 years. Because after, I believe it was either 2019 or 2020, one of their members sadly passed away. And I thought they disbanded, because that's already heartbreaking enough, because it's not really something that keeps a band going. But Lord and behold, they're back, which totally caught me off guard. Now, Endon is, or was, a noise grind band that experimented so much with, because they had like two noise boards, or noise guys, I should say, recording, that it would fling the band in all different directions. That for me personally, in 2017, when they released Through the Mirror, that was their peak, and I would say the album of the year of 2017. But when we get to 2018 with the follow-up, that being Boy Meets Girl, I was honestly kind of let down by it because it felt like Endon had no idea what they were trying to do. On one hand, they wanted to be like that noise rock, grindcore approach, but on the other hand, they were trying to be like this, soundscape version of like Merzbow. So I was kind of a bit let down because it didn't have any focus. Where Fall of Spring, it feels like Endon has found their focus, and it's a massive improvement from the last album. As now with this album, it's not really a grindcore album anymore. It's way more rooted in like the soundscapes of noise and like noise core or ambience and a lot of abrasive textures. That it's not metal by any stretch, or nothing like extreme metal or by any stretch, I should say, but it resembles the energy you would get from extreme music. That it's a blast. It's honestly a blast if you're looking for an experimental release, and I'm just overall thrilled with joy that Endon decided to continue going. Number 10, Ungfell, Dunget. Ungfell, for my personal standards, is one of, if not the best black metal band going right now that formed in the 21st century, because they've been so consistent ever since they started. I know they're often compared to Peste Noire, which, yeah, the resemblance is there. Only Ungfell's approach is a lot more upbeat and more high energy, as it has guitar riffs eerily similar to that of Peste Noire, but they don't really experiment in that direction like them. It's way more rooted now with folk music in the sense of like, folklore, really fleshing out more of like I believe they're from Switzerland, Swiss aesthetics into their sound, and that's what's always kind of given them more of their own unique identity compared to a lot of other bands influenced by Peste Noire. And with this particular album, I think they're keeping it with their straightforward and standard approach that they're known for doing. Only vocally I've noticed it's a bit more varied up in terms of like the different pitches, as there's clean singing, there's the harsh screechy vocals, there's some low vocals that are more grunted. That gives some variation on the vocal approach. Instrumentally though, you're either going to get the fast-paced tremolo pick guitars that you're used to hearing from previous albums, with other transitions of like folk instrumentation, more acoustic works, that again give some variation to their songwriting approach. But as I stated, for my standards, they've never let me down, and it's just another great inclusion in the Ungfell discography. Number 9, Markgraf, Hutenbaden. This is the band of the friend that I discovered Flying Mausoleum from. This is his band. Now, Markgraf is a German heavy metal band that plays around a lot with black metal. In some sense, the best way to understand their guitar writing approach is it sounds like a mixture of, take Sereth Ungol, but only if they were a black metal band. That's what Markgraf sounds like, and it's excellent stuff. Now, in this particular album, they went a lot more ambitious from their debut full-length album, which is definitely worth checking out, as I believe it clocks in a little over half an hour long, and it's only 4 tracks. And the first 3 range around like 5 to, I think, 1 minute at most, as it's an instrumental interlude. But it's the closing track on here, the title track, that goes for a little over 20 minutes long. That is just an odyssey of dreamy, heavy metal guitar riffs, and that track alone is worth buying this record and listening to it in full. As from my understanding, in terms of like interviews that he's posted and just what I know from him, massive fan of Cocteau Twins, and it honestly feels like the 20-minute long like odyssey track I'm talking about. It's like, what if you got the dreamy, ethereal sensation of Cocteau Twins played as a heavy metal band? That's what honestly the outro track sounds like, and it is just so goddamn awesome, and a humongous reason as to why it cracked into my top 10. Number 8, Mitochondrion, Vitreous Septum, another band I have been waiting forever to release a new album, as their last one was released back in 2011, so a 13-year time gap in between full-length albums. That I remember keeping up with them, and roughly around I think 2017 on their Facebook, they announced that they're working on new material. It'll be out soon. And even on the notes of this album, it says that they've been working since 2017 on it. And God damn, it was worth the wait, because leave it to Mitochondrion on their third full-length album to release this monumentally destructive, dissonant, and vicious album that blends forms of death metal and black metal together. That I know they're often compared to that to Portal, but Mitochondrion is way more on the frontal assault on their approach. And on this album, it's like this occultish, nightmarish, destructive take of Black Death, and every song is so awesome, but so nightmarish. I love it. Every single song in this album, I believe, runs for a little over 80 minutes long. So, prepare yourself or make time for this album, because it's absolutely worth diving into and absolutely worth the wait. And you can definitely tell that they went the extra mile with this album, since again they've been recording it or writing it since 2017. Number 7, Ghostly Kisses, Dark Room. This is a Quebec dream pop project, all done by singer-songwriter Margot Souvet, who her voice, in my personal view, is the definition of elegant and ethereal to the maximum degree. It is just ear candy to hear her sing, and it's just absolutely gorgeous sounding, regardless of what song you listen to in the Ghostly Kisses discography. Now, on this particular album, they still carry over that dream pop sound, only the change up here is it's a bit more upbeat in terms of the percussions being used, and kind of leans more into synth pop territory instrumentally. And the outcome of that is songs tend to be a bit more anthemic and catchy sounding, and honestly, they're ear candy, to say the least, listening to it. And I love really basically every song on this album. That all around, even though they changed it up a little bit, it's still just as great as everything else they've done, and just overall a phenomenal album. Number 6, Melt Banana, 3+5. This is their 8th full-length album, and Melt Banana is a Japanese-based noise rock band that has been chaotic and all over the place since day one. And as well, they're another band that hasn't released anything in 10 or 11 years, and they come out of nowhere with a new full-length album. And their previous album, I believe, was Fetch, which gained them a lot of traction, and that was like a mixture of punk rock, noise punk, noise rock, and even forms of grindcore that they felt like they were more of like punk affiliated with the instrumentation. Whereas 3+5, it feels like they still carry over, like they've done with everything else, this kind of like hardcore punk and noise rock instrumentation, but they really put a lot more emphasis on the electronics on this album. And just like everything else they've done, it stands shoulder to shoulder with the wacky, zany, all over the place wild sound that they're known for, and it's just as great as everything else that they've done. So it's good to know that even after like another 10-year or decade deficit in between albums, Melt Banana hasn't lost their edge even in the slightest. Number 5, Gloomy Reflections, Oath of the Paladins. This was probably the biggest shocker to me out of everything on this list, because I honest to God thought I would despise this album when I heard it, mainly because it consists of 2 guys, and I believe one of the members is in Black Magic SS, a project I've never cared for and still to this day do not care for. Their approach of like psychedelic rock, prog rock, space rock, and forms of black metal, that it just always kind of sounded like cheap knockoff Uriah Heep guitar riffs, and I've just never really cared for it. And I, again, as I stated, I still don't to this day. But Gloomy Reflections, it sounds like that, but the dynamics just click with me so much more. Mainly because Gloomy Reflections started out as a dungeon synth project, but now has transitioned to this progressive rock, heavy metal sound
that, yeah, you can notice it sounds like Black Magic SS kinda, but the vocals, the guitar riffs, and the overall structure and dynamics and compositions of the synthesizers sound so much more like Hollis, which I believe they are a progressive rock band based out of Sweden, and that band is awesome, and that's what this sounds like, only it's the heavy metal version of it, and every single freaking song is so infectious. I swear to God, if you don't, not even just if you like one song, if you just like one guitar riff that you'll hear on this album, you're gonna love the rest of it. It's just like everything stands shoulder to shoulder and flows so perfectly that the melodies, the synthesizers, the singing, the choruses, you will just want to snap your fingers to every single note on this album. And I've been spinning the record nearly on a daily basis ever since I got it. And I would state for everyone who enjoys bands like Hollis or Uriah Heep, this is a must listen. Number 4, Norna, with their self-titled full-length album. Norna are a doom metal, sludge, hardcore band based out of Sweden. And the biggest reason as to why I love this album, and it's ranked so high up, is it features the vocalist to Breach. Now, Breach is my all-time favorite hardcore band. I think how they experimented and played around with forms of post-hardcore and sludge together is just excellent stuff that's always resonated with me so strongly. Breach, It's Me God is still one of my all-time favorite albums. And that's what I hear when I hear this individual's voice. And it's so cool to know that even after Breach ended, he's still creating music. As I believe shortly after Breach ended, he did Terra Tenebrosa, which that's no longer active. But if you enjoy like surrealist, like abstract metal, definitely check out Terra Tenebrosa. But here with Norna, it resembles Breach a lot stronger, as again, the sludge and hardcore elements are there. But it's heavier and darker because of the doom metal aspect on it. And God, this album just hits like a ton of bricks with every single riff, every single scream you'll hear. It's just everything I would want if Breach were ever to reform or make something eerily similar to what they did in the past. This is like the next evolutionary step, and I love it. And as I stated, mainly it's just because of that connection I have with it, I had to rank it up to number 4. Number 3, Painkiller, Samsara. I cannot believe I am talking about a new Painkiller record. This is their first record in 30 years. And it's just as wild and off the rails like anything else you'll hear in Painkiller or anything else that John Zorn fucking does. Oh my God. For those who don't know, Painkiller is a... God, what to call them? Like, I've seen labels such as avant-garde free jazz is maybe one way of describing it, but God, that, like most things that are abstract, that doesn't give it justice with just a few genre tags, because Painkiller is and was this kind of like powerhouse of a jazz band, because yeah, it's jazz and free jazz, what people who are affiliated with grindcore and extreme metal, as yeah, you have John Zorn, who's always had an interest with extreme metal and always done free jazz in such a aggressive way that it resembles grindcore almost, with some other of his works like, you know, Naked City and shit like that. But you also have the original drummer of Napalm Death, that being Mick Harris, affiliated with this project, which I know he has like health issues as to why he doesn't do percussions with, like, you know, the acoustic drum set. But on this album, ever since I think it was like the mid-90s or something, he started becoming more fascinated with electronic music. You get the electronic percussions on this album, again, all done by Mick Harris. And they're more done in this rhythmic, repetitive kind of way that kind of gives you some kind of pattern to follow, I guess, when you listen to this album. But make no mistake about it, when John Zorn starts going off on his saxophone, it is just, you know, let loose. Like, don't expect to ever have any kind of like brain power to follow along with it. And as I stated, it goes so off the rails. And for people who like abstract music that just lets loose in the most extreme way possible, regardless of genre tags, this is the album of 2024 to know and listen to. And again, I'm just in disbelief that Painkiller came back. Number 2, being the runner-up for Album of the Year, is going to go to Axis of Perdition, Apertures. Another band that I'm in disbelief that these guys returned as well, as this is their first album in 13 years. 2024 seems to be the year of the comeback, it seems, for my personal taste. And oh my god, this album is everything I wanted and more when I heard that they were working on new material. I know it's not going to be released until next week, but for the one and only time I had to get a promo copy just to know what it sounded like. And again, as I stated, it's everything I would want by them and then some. As these guys are a UK-based black metal band that blends forms of industrial together, but they do it so seamlessly that it always leaves me in awe, but also terrified at the same time. And with this album, they managed to do it again. Because the riffs, the vocals, the atmosphere is everything I want in black metal. It even gets a bit more on the progressive and avant-garde side with the structure of it. And it works so well with like the surrealist industrial forms of music that they include that, again, it just blends together seamlessly. And it just leaves me in awe and terrified like everything else that they've done. And for me personally, it's a bold statement, but it needs to be stated. Not only is this the best black metal album of 2024, but it's the best metal album I've heard of 2024. Number 1, album of the year was an easy pick for me because I've talked about it a handful of times on my personal Instagram. So for those who know me or keep up with me personally, this is not a surprise. But for those who don't know of this, I strongly urge you to give it a chance because it's unlike anything I've ever heard, and it's truly a one-of-a-kind album. And that's going to go to Avalanche Kato Tali Takum. For starters, I don't know still what this genre is that they're playing around with, and maybe that's why I'm always so fascinated by it. I've listened to this album probably dozens of times at this point, and I'm still stumped as to describe how or what I'm hearing. The only thing that is consistent that I've noticed is from other people who have done reviews for it, they keep referencing that when it comes to the lyrics and vocal approach on this album, it's heavily rooted in a style of music known as griot, which is a form of music that you'll find in like the West African culture. So that's one thing consistent. Other than that, good luck, because what I hear is forms of punk, industrial rock, forms of flute being played here that I wouldn't necessarily call it folk music, but you'll hear a flute being played throughout it, breakbeat when it comes to the percussions, other forms of funk music that it kind of reminds me a little bit of Tackhead with how they play some of the grooves on certain parts. But again, everything I just said describing this album, I'm nitpicking certain parts of the album to give this a one-scale genre tag. That is impossible. You cannot label this under just one genre tag or a handful of genre tags. It's something in its own league that is, as I stated, a one-of-a-kind album that I think transcends genre tags in some sense, and it's just always left me in awe and just speechless whenever I try to describe this to people. And even now I'm still like stumped as to what to say about it, and maybe it's a humongous reason as to why I felt like I needed to put this at album of the year, because it's truly a one-of-a-kind album and easily my personal favorite album of 2024. And that's going to do it for my top 25 favorite albums of 2024. Really curious to know what was your personal favorite or favorite albums of this year. Definitely let me know in the comments. Like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below when I get around to it. And that is that. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.